Hey everybody. So my video is going to be on Christopher Columbus. Especially in school today, it's like a really controversial topic whether or not Columbus is taught as a positive figure or a negative figure. But really, I think we should just be teaching the facts and the history of what happened. So, as a historian and as a history teacher, it's very vital that my students get an accurate depiction of what the history is, and then they can make conclusions based on that history for themselves. So, most importantly, when talking about Christopher Columbus, in a bunch of research articles, it was found that most often teachers shy away from teaching the truth of Columbus and the truth of the enslavement, the truth of the genocide, the truth of the killings that happened at that time when Columbus came to the Hispaniolas. And so I think that this stems from a lot of things. First off, it's a national narrative, and that's one of the terms that you should know. National narrative meaning a narrative that is theirs for a very long time. It's deeply rooted and it promotes a sense of national identity. And Columbus Day is really one of those things, especially for Italian Americans. And so oftentimes in school districts where there's a lot of Italian heritage, oftentimes teachers find it difficult to teach a negative view of Columbus, even though that negative view might be the factual thing about what happened, because it might stain the patriotism or the national identity that those Italian students have, and it also, their parents might be not be too accepting of that. Now, the study found that I think it was not 90, but 14% of people thought that it was appropriate to teach the truth of what Columbus had done, and not just Columbus, but the Spanish settlers had done to the native Taino and other population tribe that was already there, the indigenous peoples that were already residing there. Only 14% thought that it should be taught in schools, but 92% thought that the Holocaust should be taught. So it's interesting that we have a dichotomy between the Holocaust and something that happened to the Indians. That in the Holocaust, it's clear that we should teach that that was a wrongdoing. We should teach that, but it's not okay to teach that Columbus also did something that was terrible. I think that students of history and history teachers alike should embrace the history for what it is and embrace the fact that Christopher Columbus, although discovering America was a brave endeavor, and discovering the San Salvador was a brave endeavor, it was also saturated with slavery, saturated with killing and unjust acts that were only appropriate at the time, but nowadays we have to look back at them with a sense of disgust and understand that even though it was the way of the world at the time, it doesn't justify it. And that's something that's really important in a history classroom. So, number one, teaching Christopher Columbus for what he was historically and accurately. He landed in San Salvador, 1492 on a 10-week journey, and he immediately ran into this Taino tribe, which was on the island of the Bahamas, what he called it San Salvador, we call it the modern Hispaniolas. And he landed there and immediately found contact with this Taino tribe. There was also cannibalistic tribes in the island, and a lot of those ended up being shipped into slavery. And kids, oftentimes aren't taught this in school, that that Columbus was this, he really did enslave a lot of people for colonial gain, and had them put to work, viciously. A lot of their items were stolen, their land was taken from them, and obviously diseases happened to wipe out like a large amount of the population. And I think that that's something that history teachers need to focus on, and do it in a way where you allow the students to make up their own mind about Christopher Columbus, because it's really in teaching, this is the main point of this, is that we're not teaching kids what to think, we're teaching them how to think. And I think that's one of the most important things that we should stick to. Never teach a kid what to think, teach them how to think. And I think that's what we're doing when we talk about Christopher Columbus, especially when we acknowledge the negative things that Christopher Columbus did. We have to teach that factually. We have to teach that true. We have to teach the truth about history. And so even though parents might be, distraught at that, you need to make sure that as a teacher, you're upholding your duty as a history teacher to not just teach, easy history, but teach hard history. Teach the history that really makes kids think and struggle, and then reconceptualize their world, and give them information that maybe challenges some of the notions of nationalism, some of the notions of national identity that they might have, that might be based in the destruction of indigenous peoples. And we don't want indigenous peoples in America to be feeling like there's a national narrative that is against them. We don't want indigenous people, especially if one of the students in the class is from an indigenous background and feels that cultural backlash against their own culture when we're teaching about Columbus. We need to make sure that every kid feels like he's included and every kid feels like he's safe. That's that's one of the most important things you can do. And in history, when you're teaching a hard history, it's important to teach what happened and let the kids make up their minds about it for themselves. I think that oftentimes, we talk about Columbus Day and we talk about Indigenous Peoples Day as being this, opposing these two opposing forces, when in reality they can both exist. I think Columbus Day does have a place in some people's celebrations. I think that people want to celebrate that Western civilization arrived at the Western Hemisphere when Christopher Columbus sailed the ocean blue in 1492, and they're welcome to celebrate that. They're welcome to celebrate that he took a courageous journey. However, I would always encourage people to look at what happened, look at the facts, look at the history behind it, make sure that you're not selling yourself and others short, make sure that you're paying attention to the truth behind what happened, because we all know that a brutal colonizer, we don't necessarily celebrate some of the conquistadors, you know what I mean? But we celebrate Christopher Columbus because we've attributed him with the discovery of the Americas, and we need to make sure that we treat him in the same light as we would treat anybody that committed a heinous act of inhumane violence against somebody. So even though it's in the past, I challenge every history student in this class, every history student around the world, whoever finds this video, to make sure that when Columbus arises, you're not afraid to teach the history, the factually, true history behind what happened, and give sources and say, hey, this is, even though Christopher Columbus may have done a great, courageous thing and discovered America, this is what happened, this is what resulted from that, and this is how we should perceive it now. And this is what we can do now to maybe remedy some of the deep-rooted issues that now stem from that time period where so many people had their land and their lives taken away because of westward expansion. And at the same time, acknowledge the fact that Columbus is such a major historical figure, and you don't want to erase him from history. That's why I don't think erasing Columbus Day is a good thing, because when you take away a historical figure, let's say if you tear down a statue, if you erase Columbus Day from existence, you are deleting history. You're destroying history, and we need to make sure that history stays there so that we can acknowledge the fact that some people in the past have done things that were wrong, and we have overcome that. If we don't understand where we came from in terms of Christopher Columbus being as ruthless as he was as a conquistador and a conqueror, really, then we don't know how far we've come. And it's important to know how far we've come and to acknowledge the progress that we've made, especially because we need to not make that mistake again. It's important that we know what happened in the past so that we don't ever, make the same mistake. And so when you tear down statues or where you erase Columbus Day, you do delete history in a sense. And I think that instead of deleting history, we should be teaching history for what it is, and then letting students decide what they wish with that information for themselves, teaching them how to think instead of what to think. That's the most important thing. Teach students how to think, not what to think. Thank you, everybody.